I never expected the quiet streets of Willow Ridge to become the backdrop for one of the darkest chapters in my life. When I first moved into the gated community with my daughter Lily, it felt like a blessing. A clean, manicured neighborhood tucked away in the suburbs just outside Atlanta. It was everything I thought we needed, a fresh start. After years of bouncing between apartments and VA clinics, I was finally able to give my daughter stability, safety, and a home with a yard she could call her own. My name is David, and I served 2 tours overseas as a combat medic. Nothing in war prepared me for the battles I'd face after returning home. Adjusting to civilian life, raising a child on my own, and caring for a daughter with cerebral palsy. But I never saw Lily as a burden. If anything, she saved me from myself. Where I was angry and closed off, she was light curiosity and laughter. Even on her toughest days, when her legs ached and her crutches felt heavier than usual, she smiled. She taught me more about courage than I ever learned on the battlefield. The day we moved into Willow Ridge, the sun was shining and the HOA had placed a welcome basket on our doorstep. Fresh cookies, a list of community events, a glossy brochure with rules and regulations printed in cheerful fonts. I should have paid more attention to that last part, but honestly, I was just grateful. Lily rolled down the ramp I'd installed for her walker, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the neighborhood park just down the street. At first, the neighbors seemed kind enough. The Johnsons brought over a lasagna. Old Mrs. Chun from across the street offered Lily a handmade quilt. Even the HOA president, Karen Whitmore, introduced herself with a firm handshake and an artificial smile. She was in her late 50s, tall, immaculately dressed in pressed pastels, and carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. She leaned down to Lily and said, "We're very big on appearances around here, sweetheart. Clean sidewalks and happy faces." Lily just blinked at her. I smiled politely, not thinking much of it. For a while, everything felt normal. We settled in. I started working remotely for a telehealth provider, and Lily was enrolled in a nearby special needs school. Every afternoon, she'd come home, kick off her shoes, and draw with chalk on the driveway while I grilled or tinkered with the garden. She made friends with some neighborhood kids, and the sound of her laughter echoing through our cul-de-sac made every struggle feel worth it. But then, the letters started coming. At first, they were small things. A notice about our trash bin being left out past pickup day. A friendly reminder that the color of our shutters was slightly out of community compliance. Then came the passive-aggressive notes taped to our front door. One read, "Lawn edges uneven. This reflects poorly on the entire neighborhood." Another said, "Sidewalk ramp is visually disruptive." I raised an eyebrow at that one. Visually disruptive to whom? I knew who was behind it. Every letter bore the stamp of the HOA, and every HOA meeting I attended was dominated by Karen's voice. She ran the board like a dictatorship masked in smiles. I tried to speak up at one meeting, asking if there was any flexibility for families with disabilities, especially regarding external modifications like ramps and handrails. Karen looked right through me and said, "We believe in equal enforcement for all residents, Mr. Collins. Special treatment invites chaos." Still, I tried to keep the peace. I adjusted the ramp's angle so it wasn't so visible from the road. I made sure the lawn was mowed twice a week, but the tone kept shifting. Karen's reminders turned into warnings. Lily's sidewalk drawings, colorful chalk rainbows, and puppies were suddenly graffiti. When a neighbor let their dog off-leash near Lily, Karen blamed us for being too sensitive. It was as if Lily's mere presence, her crutches, her wheelchair ramp, her laughter, was an offense to her ideal of suburbia. One afternoon, I returned from picking Lily up at school to find a yellow flyer tucked under the windshield of my truck. It read, "Parking a vehicle over the line disrupts the aesthetic flow of the neighborhood. Final warning." I looked around. My tires weren't even touching the line. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. This was about control. I talked to Lily about it gently. I asked her if anything strange had happened when I wasn't home. She hesitated, then mentioned that her crutches had been moved from the porch to behind the trash cans one day. Another time, her favorite sidewalk chalk had disappeared. I felt the burn of anger rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down. I didn't want to scare her. I considered filing a formal complaint, maybe even reaching out to a lawyer. But something held me back. I was trying so hard to build a quiet life for us, to not make waves, to believe that maybe this was just a misunderstanding and things would calm down. Then something changed. It was a Tuesday evening just before sunset. I was watering the front garden while Lily sat on the porch step, humming and fiddling with the foam grips on her crutches. Karen was walking her Yorkshire Terrier past our house, sunglasses perched on her head despite the fading light. She stopped at the edge of our yard and stared at Lily. No smile, no wave, just stared. Lily looked up and offered a small smile. "Hi, Miss Karen." Karen didn't reply. Her lips tightened. Her eyes flicked to the crutches, then to the ramp, then back to Lily. Then, without breaking eye contact, she muttered under her breath, "These things are a hazard." I froze, hose still running in my hand, unsure if I'd heard correctly. Lily tilted her head, confused. Karen turned and walked away, without another word, her little dog trotting beside her like a soldier on parade. That night, I sat awake long after Lily had gone to bed, listening to the silence of our perfect little neighborhood. Something inside me knew this wasn't over. It was only beginning. The storm was coming. After that evening, something in the air changed. I could feel it every time I stepped outside, like the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Karen no longer pretended to be polite. She stopped saying hello, stopped waving, stopped acknowledging Lily altogether. What had started as passive-aggressive post-it notes and policy violations was shifting into something colder, something more calculated. Within a week, a new motion was proposed at the monthly HOA meeting, Sidewalk Preservation and Obstruction Mitigation Act. It sounded official, even reasonable on paper, a policy to maintain clear pedestrian pathways for safety and aesthetic appeal. But buried in the fine print was language that effectively banned any temporary objects left within 6 inches of the sidewalk, including bikes, toys, chalk art, and mobility aids. I sat in that meeting, staring at Karen as she read through the draft proposal like she was presenting the Constitution. Most of the room didn't understand the implications. Some nodded, others scrolled on their phones. I raised my hand and asked a simple question. Does this mean my daughter can't leave her crutches on the front step while she plays in the yard? Karen didn't miss a beat. If the crutches encroach onto community sidewalks, even by a few inches, yes. We're aiming for uniformity. We can't make exceptions. I looked around the room. No one spoke. A couple glanced at me, then looked away. That night, I checked our cameras again. I'd installed them after the chalk theft and the missing crutches incident. Nothing new. But it was getting harder to tell if I was being paranoid or if the neighborhood was really turning against us. Every time Lily left her crutches at the edge of the porch, I moved them inside. She didn't complain, but her smile was a little dimmer. The next morning, we woke up to another letter. This one had red ink across the top, formal violation, improper storage of medical equipment. Apparently, someone had submitted a complaint that Lily's crutches were left out for over 3 hours unattended. The timestamp? From the exact time we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset the evening before. I was furious. I drafted a letter to the HOA board demanding answers and filed a formal appeal. But Karen responded directly, "Your appeal has been noted and denied. As a courtesy, we have waived the associated fine this time. However, continued noncompliance will escalate to legal enforcement." Legal enforcement? For crutches? I started keeping detailed logs, every letter, every incident, every petty violation. I made backups of the security footage and organized a folder labeled Evidence Willow Ridge HOA. I didn't know what I was building toward, but something told me to be ready. Lily, meanwhile, tried to pretend none of it was happening. She still drew on the sidewalk with chalk, even though I warned her Karen might complain again. She started drawing her own keep-out signs with flowers and bunnies and taped them around her ramp. When I asked her why, she said softly, "So, Miss Karen knows this is mine, and it's not hurting anyone. I hugged her so tightly she squeaked. Then came the community walkthrough. Once a month, HOA board members did a street-by-street inspection. This time, Karen brought along two other board members, a couple named Ron and Trish, and walked directly up to our house while I was inside finishing a work call. Lily was out front, reading a picture book on the porch swing. The ramp was clear. Her crutches were leaning neatly against the wall. Karen stood at the foot of our yard and took photos. She didn't say a word to Lily, just snapped pictures of the ramp, the handrails, the crutches. Then, according to the security footage I reviewed later, she pointed at the crutches, said something to Ron, then reached into her purse and pulled out a measuring tape. She measured the distance between the edge of the crutch base and the sidewalk. Ron nodded. Trish jotted something on a clipboard. That night, another violation appeared in my email. Sidewalk encroachment. Repeat offense. No fine this time, but a final written warning attached. If there was one more infraction, we'd be subject to legal proceedings per HOA Clause 17b. I forwarded everything to a disability rights nonprofit I'd found online. I wasn't sure they could help, but I needed someone, anyone, to see what was happening. They replied within 48 hours. They'd review the documents and follow up. I hoped it would make a difference, but things only escalated. 2 days later, Lily came home from school with a scraped knee. She'd fallen getting off the school bus because her crutches were missing from where she'd left them near the ramp. I found them thrown in the backyard under a pile of sticks and leaves. When I asked her what happened, she just said, "It's okay, Dad. I'll be more careful." No, this wasn't okay. I knocked on Mrs. Chen's door. She'd been kind to us since day one. When I explained everything, the complaints, the violations, the photos, the disappearing crutches, she didn't look surprised. She nodded slowly and said something I'll never forget. 10 years ago, a family with an autistic son lived 2 doors down. Karen got rid of them, too. Said the boys' sounds were disturbing the peaceful ambience of the street. The HOA backed her up. No one fought her. I felt sick. That night, I sat on the porch with Lily as she read her book and leaned against my arm. I stared out into the street, eyes scanning the shadows of well-manicured lawns and identical mailboxes. Karen's house was lit up across the road, glowing like a smug little fortress. The war hadn't started with bullets or bombs, but it had started, and deep inside, I knew. The next move was going to be hers. It was a Saturday in late spring, the kind of warm, breezy day that begged for lemonade and open windows. Lily had just finished painting a handmade sign for the front yard that read, "All kids welcome," with flowers, stars, and a big rainbow across the top. She'd used her new sidewalk-safe paint markers and was so proud of it. As always, she leaned her crutches carefully against the porch railing and dragged herself down the ramp using her arms, giggling all the way. I was grilling in the backyard, flipping burgers, trying to give her a moment to feel independent. Every few minutes, I peeked over the fence. She was playing hopscotch with some chalk she'd managed to find hidden behind the garage, probably her last stash. Karen had thrown out the last batch, claiming graffiti encourages other children to deface public spaces. The sound came suddenly, a loud crack, like dry wood splitting under pressure. I rushed around the house. Lily was sitting on the sidewalk, her palms scraped, tears brimming in her wide eyes. One of her crutches was broken clean in half, the metal twisted, the rubber tip torn off, and lying in the grass. The second crutch was missing entirely. What happened? I knelt beside her. "Did you fall? Where's the other one?" "I don't know," she said softly. I was drawing the stars, and I heard someone walking. Then I looked back and they were just gone. And then I tried to stand up, she couldn't finish. I helped her inside, cleaned the scrapes, calmed her down with a popsicle. Then I went straight to the camera footage. I had set up multiple angles over the past month, ever since things had started getting worse. And sure enough, at exactly 2:12 p.m., I saw her, Karen Whitmore, marching up the porch steps like she owned the place. Her little dog on a leash in one hand, her phone in the other. She looked around, scanned the area, and then, without hesitation, grabbed both of Lily's crutches. One she jammed between the porch railing and the brick post, then stomped on it. Twice. The second, she tucked under her arm like it was a fallen branch and walked off down the street. My hands were shaking, not with fear, with rage. I printed stills. I downloaded the footage. I made copies and uploaded them to the cloud, sent one to my email, one to my sister in Boston, and one to a disability rights lawyer named Jordan Reyes I had spoken with earlier that week. Then I drove straight to Karen's house. Her driveway was empty, her porch spotless. I pounded on her door. Anyway, after a minute, she opened it slowly, her expression smug and calm like she'd been waiting for me. "I want to know why you did it," I said. My voice was low, steady. Years of military training kicked in. "You stole and destroyed medical equipment from a child." Her smile didn't even flicker. "Your daughter left garbage lying around on public property. I simply enforced our sidewalk policy." "Garbage?" I repeated, stunned. "They're her crutches, you psychopath." Karen folded her arms. If she can't carry them herself, maybe she shouldn't be playing alone outside. It's not my fault if she's uncoordinated. I didn't even realize I'd stepped closer until she leaned back like I might hit her. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I turned around, got in my truck, and drove straight to the police station. I showed them the video, explained the situation, asked for a report to be filed. The officer, a tired-looking man named Donnelly, watched the footage twice. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's disturbing, but unfortunately, this might fall under civil, not criminal, unless you can prove intent to harm or value over $500. She took mobility aids from a disabled child," I said, "and smashed one of them in broad daylight." "I get it," he said. "I do. I'll file a report, but you'll need to go through the HOA's legal process or file in small claims. Trust me, these neighborhood association cases get messy. Judges don't like them unless someone ends up hospitalized." I left with a case number and no real justice. But I wasn't done. That evening, Lily was unusually quiet. She didn't ask for TV or snacks. She just sat on her bed, hugging her pillow, and whispered, "Why does Miss Karen hate me?" I didn't have an answer. I just pulled her into my arms and said, "She doesn't hate you. She hates herself. And hurting you is the only way she knows how to feel powerful. But we're not going to let her win." She nodded into my chest, but I could feel her body trembling. The next day, I kept Lily home from school. I called Jordan, the lawyer, and scheduled a video consult. I sent her the footage, the letters, the documentation. After reviewing it, she said simply, "You have a case, and a strong one." Meanwhile, I installed 2 more cameras, one under the porch and another behind the bushes facing the street. I posted a printed screenshot of Karen grabbing the crutches right above our mailbox. I didn't name her, but I didn't need to. Everyone knew. The neighborhood went quiet, like the entire block was holding its breath. For a few days, nothing happened. No violations. No letters. Karen didn't walk her dog past our house anymore. Until Friday. That morning, Lily opened her school lunch to find a folded piece of paper tucked beside her sandwich. It wasn't for me. In shaky block letters it read, "You don't belong here." Lily started crying in front of her teacher. The school called me immediately. I drove over, spoke with the principal, then reviewed the building's security tapes. They couldn't identify who put the note in her bag, but the school agreed to let her eat in the counselor's office from now on. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the folder labeled Evidence Willow Ridge, HOA. It was full now. Images, recordings, timestamps, testimonies. I wasn't just protecting Lily anymore. I was preparing for war. Karen thought she'd broken something that couldn't be fixed, but what she didn't know was that she had just made her biggest mistake yet. She had crossed the line from petty cruelty into something darker. She'd messed with the wrong father, and she'd underestimated the strength of a little girl with crutches made of steel. After the lunchbox note incident, I stopped waiting for justice to come. I knew now that no amount of HOA meetings or neighborly talks would stop Karen. She had declared war on my daughter, and by extension on me. and she thought she could keep hiding behind policy, behind bylaws, behind the HOA's paper shield. She had no idea I'd fought real enemies. And I never lost when it came to protecting my people. The first thing I did was file a formal restraining order request with the county courthouse. I attached the surveillance footage, the police report, the image of the smashed crutch, and even the school incident summary. My lawyer, Jordan Reyes, reviewed everything and said we had enough for a civil harassment case and a disability rights violation claim. That gave me momentum, but I wanted more than court filings. I wanted to hit Karen where she felt safest, her power. So I dug deeper into the HOA itself. Every HOA is supposed to be a democratic body with oversight, but Willow Ridge's HOA? It was Karen's kingdom. She had been president for 9 straight years. The other board members, Ron, Trish, and a rarely seen retiree named Bill, rubber-stamped everything she proposed. There were no elections, no minutes published. The HOA website hadn't been updated in 2 years. I asked around quietly, knocked on doors, spoke with neighbors I barely knew. Many of them were hesitant at first, but when I mentioned Lily and what Karen had done to her crutches, something shifted. I always thought it was just me. One neighbor, Tina, said she was a young mother who had recently gotten a fine for letting her daughter leave a stroller near the sidewalk. Another neighbor, Mike, told me Karen had accused him of unauthorized paint when he repaired a broken fence panel and then charged him $600 in restoration fees. Mrs. Chun was the one who finally cracked the vault. She invited me in for tea one afternoon and slid a thick, yellowing binder across her kitchen table. I kept copies of everything. Karen never thought anyone would notice, but I did. Inside the binder were 10 years of internal HOA documents, meeting agendas, financial statements, even budget approvals with questionable signatures. There were oddities everywhere. Tens of thousands spent on beautification from a contractor Karen's cousin owned, landscaping invoices without receipts, missing elections. This, Jordan said during our next Zoom call, is not just abuse of power, it's fraud. We started building our legal offensive. Meanwhile, I launched an anonymous social media campaign. I created a private Facebook group called Residents for Real Change, Willow Ridge, and invited the people I had spoken with. Within 48 hours, we had 37 members. By the end of the week, it was over 80. I posted Karen's HOA violations with redacted names and let residents share their own. The stories poured in. A veteran fined for flying an American flag too large. A couple told to remove the scent of their backyard barbecue because it was intrusive. A woman with arthritis forced to remove her front porch chair because it cluttered the aesthetic. It wasn't just us. Karen had been tormenting the entire community, using the HOA as her personal weapon. Then came the breakthrough. Jordan helped me contact the local news. We didn't need to name Karen directly, we just presented the facts. A disabled child's mobility aids destroyed, HOA harassment, financial discrepancies. The reporter's eyes lit up. "You've got a firebomb here," she said. 2 weeks later, the story aired on the local CBS affiliate under the title, HOA Harassment, Disabled Child Targeted in Sidewalk Policy Controversy. The footage of Lily's broken crutch ran on a loop. The blurred-out video of Karen stomping on the crutch played behind the anchor's narration. My voice was calm, measured, and firm in the interview. I spoke not just as a father, but as a veteran and a citizen demanding accountability. The fallout was immediate. Karen tried to issue a statement, something about false framing and safety policies, but it backfired. More residents came forward. A few printed screenshots from the Facebook group and taped them to her front door. Someone wrote "Crutch Crusher" on her mailbox in chalk. Not that I condoned it, but I wasn't surprised. The final straw came during the emergency HOA meeting. Over 100 residents packed into the Willow Ridge clubhouse. Jordan came with me. So did Lily. She wore her pink hoodie and leaned on a fresh set of crutches, the metallic kind that sparkled under the fluorescent lights. We sat in the front row. Karen stood at the podium like she always did, chin high, lips tight. She tried to speak over the crowd, but the murmurs turned into shouts. Why did you hide the finances? You destroyed that little girl's crutch. We didn't elect you. You're done, Karen. She banged her gavel like it still meant something. Then I stood up, pulled a USB from my pocket, and handed it to the board secretary. Not Karen, one of the few people left who hadn't sided with her blindly. I think the community deserves the truth, I said. The secretary plugged it into the laptop, and the projector came to life. On screen, the footage played again, clearer than ever before. Karen approaching the porch, smashing the crutch, taking the other one, walking away. Lily didn't flinch. The room erupted. Some gasped, some cursed, others shouted, "Resign! Resign!" Karen stepped back. Her voice cracked for the first time. This is an invasion of privacy. You can't use, "You stepped onto our porch," I said calmly. "You destroyed my daughter's medical aid. That's not private. That's criminal." That night, Karen fled the clubhouse through the back door. Within 24 hours, 3 of the 4 HOA board members resigned. A petition was circulated calling for Karen's immediate removal and a full audit. The community voted unanimously to suspend all HOA enforcement until the investigation was complete. And for the first time in months, Willow Ridge was quiet, not with tension, but with relief. Lily stood a little taller that day, and as we walked home together, she whispered, "We're winning, aren't we?" I nodded. We're just getting started. Victory should have felt sweet. But beneath the surface, I knew this wasn't over. Not really. Karen had gone quiet, yes, her porch dark, her front yard neglected, her once daily patrols through the neighborhood completely vanished. The HOA was in shambles, emergency elections were underway, and the residents of Willow Ridge were finally reclaiming their voices. But something still didn't sit right. There was a darkness in Karen that ran deeper than petty cruelty or control issues. I had seen people like her before, people who needed to dominate others because they were trying to drown out something inside themselves. So I started digging into Karen Whitmore's past. It began with a hunch, then a trail of breadcrumbs. Jordan, my lawyer, helped me file a public records request on Karen's HOA service history and business affiliations. While waiting for the documents, I started calling around old neighbors, former employers, even the local library archive. What I discovered made my stomach twist. Karen wasn't always the HOA tyrant of Willow Ridge. 25 years ago, she'd lived in another community about 40 minutes away in a smaller suburb called Langdon Heights. She'd served on that HOA board, too. But what caught my eye was a small obituary I found buried in the county archives. Whitmore Rachel, age 17, passed away in care of the state, survived by older sister Karen Whitmore. My breath caught. Rachel had cerebral palsy. She was institutionalized at age 9, shortly after their parents died in a car accident. Karen, then barely 21, became her guardian. But 5 months later, Rachel was sent to a long-term care facility. Reports from the time were vague, but there were whispers, claims of neglect, abandonment, even abuse. The case was sealed, but the timeline painted a clear picture. Karen hadn't just failed her sister. She had erased her. I sat in silence, staring at the printed article in my hand. The woman who had terrorized my daughter had once had a sister just like her. It was no longer just about crutches or chalk drawings. This was about something Karen had buried years ago, something that seeing Lily strong, unafraid, and joyful brought back with a vengeance. I showed Jordan the documents. She went quiet too. "This doesn't excuse anything," she finally said, "but it explains her obsession, her hatred." "She sees her sister in Lily," I murmured, "and she hates herself for it." Back in Willow Ridge, the atmosphere had shifted. Neighbors had started knocking on our door, not with complaints, but with casseroles and cookies and quiet apologies. One evening, Tina and her daughter came over. Her daughter, only a year older than Lily, handed her a hand-drawn picture of the two of them holding hands beside a rainbow. Lily's eyes lit up. She hadn't smiled that big in weeks. "We're so sorry we didn't say anything earlier," Tina said, voice trembling. "We were scared." But we should have stood up for you sooner. Another neighbor, Mike, helped me repaint our ramp, not because it was required, but because he wanted to. The same ramp Karen had once labeled unsightly was now freshly coated in sky blue, with Lily's name carefully stenciled at the base. Then came the anonymous letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats this time, just 4 words. You don't know everything. I handed it to Jordan. You think it's her? She nodded. Sounds like a last gasp. Like someone who realizes the walls are closing in. Karen's silence wasn't just fear, it was calculation. She'd always been 2 steps ahead, using policy and fear to keep others compliant. And now that her mask had slipped, she wasn't going to accept defeat quietly. So I made a decision. At the next community meeting, now open to all residents thanks to the emergency reform vote, I stood up and told the full story. Not just what Karen had done to Lily, but what I had discovered about Rachel. I didn't share it to garner sympathy for Karen, but to give context, to show how deeply unchecked trauma can rot into cruelty. I don't believe Karen is a monster, I said to the room, but I believe she created monsters in this community, in this board, and in the fear she used to control good people. We let her shape our neighborhood in the image of her pain. That ends now. The room went quiet. Even Ron, one of her former allies, looked shaken. After the meeting, Mrs. Chun approached me slowly, holding an old photograph in her hand. It was of Rachel, young in a wheelchair, smiling. I met her once, she whispered. She used to draw flowers everywhere, just like Lily. The image haunted me. Meanwhile, Jordan filed the official civil suit against Karen. Harassment, discrimination, and destruction of medical equipment. We included a request for damages, not just for the broken crutches, but for emotional distress. Karen was officially being sued in civil court, and criminal charges were still pending review. But to me, that wasn't the real win. The real win was what Lily did next. She asked to return to school, not through the counselor's office, not through the back doors, but through the front, crutches and all. And the next morning, she marched into that building with her head high and her sparkly metal crutches clicking proudly against the floor. Her teacher told me later that Lily stood in front of her class and said, "Sometimes people think different means broken, but I'm not broken. I'm strong." That night, I sat on the porch looking out at our street, once the scene of quiet hostility, now full of kids laughing and chalk drawings on the sidewalks. Lily had drawn a new sign in the yard. Our sidewalk. Our rules. Love lives here. It wasn't over. Karen still had to face court. The HOA still needed restructuring. But the scars, both hers and ours, had been dragged into the light. And light always burns away the rot. The new HOA town hall wasn't supposed to feel like a battlefield. But as I stood at the back of the crowded clubhouse, heart pounding in my chest, that's exactly what it felt like. Every chair was filled. People were standing along the walls, whispering nervously. A few held copies of the community charter, others had clipboards, phones recording, even a local news crew hovered near the entrance. It was no longer just a neighborhood issue, it had become a reckoning. At the center of it all sat Karen. She had the same tight bun, the same iron blazer, but the cold authority in her eyes had dimmed. She looked smaller now, not physically, but emotionally, like someone watching her empire crumble. Her once loyal allies, Ron, Denise, even the Adams couple, sat several seats away. No one looked at her. No one defended her. The HOA's emergency committee opened the floor to residents. The microphone felt heavy in my hand when my name was called. I took a breath and stepped forward. My name is Anna Maxwell. I began, steady but firm, and I've lived here for 4 years. Some of you know me. Most of you know my daughter, Lily. You've seen her at the mailbox, at the school, bus stop, drawing chalk rainbows on the sidewalk. Or maybe you've seen her crying after her crutches were destroyed right in front of her by a woman who was supposed to protect this community. Gasps echoed. Karen flinched. But I didn't stop. I am here tonight not just to talk about what was done to my daughter, but what has been done to all of us. We were bullied, silenced, fined, and threatened. Some of you were forced to repaint your homes, remove garden gnomes, hide disability ramps, or even abandon pets. And we let it happen. Whispers rippled across the room. People began to nod. A few neighbors looked down in shame. She used her power to turn us against each other, I continued, and she used the HOA as her personal tool of control. That ends tonight. The moderator called for order as several people started clapping. I stepped back, and others began to come forward. First was Mr. Fenton, the quiet retiree from Maple Lane. Karen told me my wind chimes violated sound pollution ordinances. I haven't played them since, but they were my late wife's. Then Tina stood up. She made me take down my daughter's swing set because it wasn't aesthetically uniform. My daughter cried for days. Even Ron, once Karen's right hand, stood. She threatened to sue me over a backyard chicken coop. I only joined the board because I was scared. Testimony after testimony poured out like a river finally breaking through a dam. Every story chipped away at the armor Karen had worn for years. And then Lily asked to speak. I froze. Sweetheart, are you sure? She nodded, her crutches squeaking as she made her way to the microphone. The room fell completely silent. My name is Lily, she said, voice soft but brave. I like unicorns and sunflowers and drawing rainbows on sidewalks. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be happy here. You could hear a pin drop. Miss Karen said my crutches were in the way, so she broke them. But that didn't break me. She smiled, because my legs may need help walking, but my heart doesn't need help standing up. Applause erupted. People stood. Some wiped their eyes. Even the HOA moderator looked shaken. Karen still hadn't spoken. Finally, the moderator turned to her. Ms. Whitmore, would you like to respond? She stood slowly. The room tensed. Her eyes scanned the crowd. No longer a queen surveying her kingdom, but a woman watching the walls close in. I've dedicated the last 10 years of my life to this community, she began. Her voice shook. I followed every rule. I enforced every bylaw. I believed it was for the good of the neighborhood. Someone shouted, you bullied kids. Another, you fined a veteran for a flagpole. Karen's composure cracked. You think it was easy? You think I wanted this job? No one else stepped up. I kept this neighborhood clean, orderly, safe. Safe from what? I asked calmly. Karen turned to me. From becoming like the one I grew up in. Full of noise, of weakness, of messes that couldn't be cleaned up. There it was, the truth beneath it all. I had a sister, she muttered. Rachel. She needed a lot of help. All the time. And no one ever helped me. So I learned to keep everything perfect. Controlled. Because if I didn't, everything fell apart. No one said a word. I took a slow breath. Then maybe it's time to let go of control. Maybe it's time for healing, for you, and for this neighborhood. Karen said nothing. The moderator called for the vote. The new HOA bylaws were passed unanimously. Term limits, transparency requirements, removal clauses for abuse of power. Karen's seat was formally vacated, and in a twist no one expected, she stood, walked quietly out the door, and never returned to another HOA meeting again. Outside, the air felt lighter. Neighbors gathered, hugging, shaking hands, exchanging numbers. The fences between us, literal and emotional, had begun to fall. Lily tugged at my sleeve. Mom, yes, baby. Can I draw a new rainbow tomorrow? For everyone. I smiled. Absolutely. And this time, no one was going to stop her. The sun was just beginning to rise the next morning when I heard the familiar squeak-squeak of Lily's crutches tapping across the driveway. But this time, her steps were filled with purpose, not hesitation. She wore her favorite sky blue jacket, and in her backpack were chalks of every color imaginable. When I opened the garage door, she grinned up at me. I'm going to draw the biggest rainbow this neighborhood's ever seen. And she did. Neighbors walked by and waved. Some stopped to help color. Others brought coffee or snapped photos, posting them with hashtags like hashtag Hope on Our Street and hashtag Let Lily Draw. What once had been the symbol of conflict, a simple sidewalk, had become a canvas for unity. But the real surprise came 2 days later when a white SUV pulled up outside her home. Karen stepped out. She didn't have her clipboard, no press blazer, just a beige sweater and jeans. She clutched something wrapped in brown paper. I stiffened. My instinct was to call Lily inside, but I didn't. Not this time. Karen approached us slowly, stopping at the edge of the driveway, like there was an invisible line she didn't dare cross. "I won't stay long," she said quietly. "I just needed to say something." I waited. Karen glanced at Lily. "I was cruel to you. What I did, it was unforgivable. But I'm going to try to make it right. If you'll let me." Lily looked up at me. I didn't speak. This had to be her decision. After a moment, she stepped forward and said simply, "Okay." Karen swallowed hard, then extended the package to her. "I had a carpenter rebuild your crutches. Custom fitted, reinforced, lightweight. My nephew's in a wheelchair. He helped design them." Lily unwrapped the package. The crutches gleamed, polished walnut with soft lavender grips. At the top of each, carved into the wood, was a sunflower, her favorite. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Lily looked at her and said, "They're beautiful. Thank you." Karen gave a small nod. "I'm moving out next month. I think it's time." And just like that, she turned and walked away. No applause, no drama, just a quiet ending to years of tension. Somehow, it felt more powerful than anything else she could have done. A week passed, then another. The HOA held new elections. Tina, the one whose daughter's swing had been removed, became the new president. Ron, now fully repentant, joined the board to advocate for accessibility improvements. And the first initiative they passed? A sidewalk art zone funded by the community. They named it Lily's Lane. On the dedication day, nearly the whole neighborhood came. There was a ribbon, a sign, and even a small wooden bench at the end of the path that read, "Kindness begins where control ends." I stood back as Lily cut the ribbon. She was laughing with other kids, sketching a giant butterfly with glowing wings. Tina stepped beside me. We used to be neighbors. Now, it finally feels like we're a community." I nodded. "Sometimes, it takes the worst storm to clear the sky." She smiled. "You ever think about joining the HOA board?" I laughed. "After everything? Not a chance. But maybe one day." That night, Lily and I sat on the porch. She rested her head on my shoulder. "Do you think Miss Karen's okay?" she asked softly. I was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, but I think she's trying. And sometimes that's the first step." Lily nodded. "I hope she draws her own rainbow one day." Tears prickled at my eyes. My daughter, the one who had suffered, the one who had every right to be bitter, had chosen compassion. Again. And in that moment, I realized something. This whole story, this whole fight, it wasn't just about sidewalks or crutches or power-hungry HOA presidents. It was about the right to be seen, to be heard, to take up space, to live fully and freely, no matter who you are. And Lily? She was teaching all of us how. Months have passed since the sidewalk was transformed into Lily's Lane. Laughter now echoes down our street in the afternoons, and neighbors no longer cross to the other side when they see each other. The fear is gone, the division mostly healed. But some wounds leave behind lessons instead of scars. And that's where this story really ends, not with the villain defeated, but with the truth revealed. Because the real villain wasn't just Karen. It was what she represented, a system that gave a handful of people unchecked power in the name of community standards, a culture that prioritized appearances over humanity, an unspoken rule that if you were different, if you were disabled, vulnerable, loud, poor, or simply inconvenient, you'd be silenced, shamed, or removed. Karen was just the face. The deeper rot? It was all around us. The HOA handbook, printed in fine legal jargon, never once mentioned accommodations or ADA compliance. The bylaws allowed fines for unsightly equipment, which included mobility aids, ramps, or porch railings. People like Lily were never factored into the design of this neighborhood. They were seen as exceptions, disruptions, And when Karen smashed those crutches, she wasn't just committing a petty act of cruelty, she was echoing something much larger. A system that believed her right to control the sidewalk was more important than a child's right to walk on it. Let that sink in. It wasn't until after the elections that I really understood the extent of it. Tina, the new HOA president, showed me a stack of old letters that had been misplaced under Karen's leadership, dozens of requests from disabled residents asking for simple things: curb cuts, tactile paving, even just permission to place a chair outside for their aging parents. All denied or ignored. And the kicker? The HOA had budgeted funds every year for community enhancement. But Karen and her board had redirected that money to repaint fences and power wash driveways, things that made the neighborhood look perfect but did nothing for the people who lived in it. It wasn't about safety. It was about control. Today, things are different. Tina helped rewrite the bylaws to include accessibility rights. A community forum now meets monthly, giving every resident, renter, or owner a chance to speak. The fine system has been overhauled to include mediation and compassion as first steps. And most importantly, Lily's story became the spark for change across other neighborhoods, too. One video of her rainbow-covered sidewalk went viral. Then local news picked it up. Then national outlets. I started receiving emails from parents, veterans, seniors, people who had felt invisible for too long, thanking us for speaking out. They weren't thanking us because we won. They were thanking us because we named the problem. Not just Karen, but the quiet policies, the silent compliance, the belief that keeping things nice is worth more than keeping things just. As for Karen, last I heard, she moved in with her sister upstate. Volunteers at a community center now. Word is she's quieter, softer. I hope she's learning. I hope she's healing. But I also hope she understands this. Apologies are not enough if they're not followed by action. Because change isn't measured in crutches gifted after damage is done. It's measured in whether the damage is allowed to happen again. One evening, I found Lily sitting on the edge of the sidewalk sketching. This time, it wasn't a rainbow. It was a bridge. Why a bridge? I asked her. She smiled. Because sometimes people are stuck on their side, and they don't know how to get to ours. A pause. So I build one. And just like that, I knew she had already moved past the pain. She was already building something better, not just for herself, but for all of us. Because when you're told you don't belong on the sidewalk, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is draw your way back onto it. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to HOA Denied Access, where real voices rise and justice always finds its way home. Your support helps us expose the truth behind the picket fences. Collision stop sign, backhand index pointing right. Hit the bell so you never miss a story that they don't want you to hear.